The grand hall of the Thalaxian palace was filled with dignitaries from all over the galaxy. Warriors, kings, and queens of powerful star systems, each more influential than the last, gathered under the gleaming chandeliers, their eyes fixed on the throne. At the center of the room stood the queen of the Thalaxian Empire, her dark eyes scanning the crowd. Her regal presence was undeniable, but the air around her was thick with tension. The Thalaxian Empire had long been known for its strength, but now, with the death of the previous emperor, it teetered on the edge of collapse. The royal bloodline, once revered across the stars, was now on the brink of extinction. The queen had 3 daughters, each one fierce and powerful in her own right. Yet, despite their strength, they were unable to secure a suitor worthy enough to carry on the empire's legacy. The queen's voice echoed through the hall, her words sharp as the blade of a sword. "Is there no one my daughters can marry?" The room fell silent at the harshness of her tone. The queen's gaze swept across the sea of faces, her frustration growing. The daughters stood behind her, their expressions unreadable, yet their unease was clear. The weight of their empire's future rested on their shoulders, and with every failed proposal, the burden grew heavier. The queen had arranged marriages with some of the most powerful leaders in the galaxy, hoping one of them would be a worthy consort for her daughters, but each suitor had proven themselves incapable, whether through arrogance, greed, or weakness. No one had been able to impress the royal daughters, each of them rejecting every man brought before them, and with every rejection the queen's patience wore thinner. She turned her gaze to her daughters, who stood close behind her. The eldest, Princess Alara, was the most regal of them all, with the quiet strength of someone who had been groomed to rule. Her golden eyes, the mark of a Thalaxian royal, stared ahead with a calm determination. But even she could not hide the disappointment in her heart. The youngest, Princess Veya, was a wild spirit, her dark hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of midnight. She had always resisted the constraints of her royal position, preferring freedom over duty. And then there was Princess Lyra, the middle child, who balanced between the two extremes. Her mind was sharp, her heart kind, but she was often torn between what was expected of her and what she truly wanted. The queen's frustration grew. "I cannot believe this. We are the last of our line, and yet no one has proven worthy enough to take my daughter's hands. What am I to do?" Her voice trembled slightly, a rare crack in her otherwise unwavering resolve. The palace fell into a heavy silence, only the distant hum of the city outside breaking through the tension. And then, from the back of the room, a voice rang out. A voice so unexpected, it caught everyone off guard. "I'll marry them." All eyes turned to the man who had spoken. He was a human, standing tall and unafraid, with an air of confidence that didn't belong in a room filled with alien royalty. He wore simple clothes, far less elaborate than the ornate robes of the Thalaxian nobles, but there was something about him that commanded attention. His brown eyes met the queen's, unflinching, as he stepped forward into the center of the room. A murmur of surprise rippled through the crowd. A human? In all the galaxy, no one had ever dared to offer themselves as a suitor to the Thalaxian princesses. Humans were far behind in technology and culture, seen as primitive by the advanced species of the stars. How could this man, with his basic knowledge and lack of power, think he was worthy of one of the royal daughters? The queen narrowed her eyes, clearly unsure of how to react. "And who are you to step forward in such a manner?" Her voice was sharp, but there was a hint of curiosity beneath it. "My name is James Carter," the man replied, his voice steady. "I'm just a human, but I've traveled far and wide. I believe someone must stand for humanity in this galaxy. If you will allow me, I will marry your daughters." The room fell into stunned silence. The other suitors, who had been waiting patiently for their turn, looked on with disbelief. The queen's gaze shifted from James Carter to her daughters. The royal family had never dealt with a situation like this. What did it mean for the future of their empire to allow a human to marry into their bloodline? "You speak of standing for humanity," the queen said, her voice measured but laced with suspicion. "What could you, a simple man from a primitive world, offer to my daughters? To my empire?" James Carter's expression didn't falter. "I offer what no one else can. A fresh perspective. Strength born not of power, but of will. I may not have the riches of your allies or the armies of your enemies, but I have my mind. I have my heart. And if you give me a chance, I will prove myself worthy of your daughter's love and your empire's future." The queen studied him for a long moment, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She saw no fear in his gaze, no hesitation in his words. There was something about this man that made her pause, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. He was not like the others, the powerful and influential suitors who had come before. He was different, but was that difference a strength or a weakness? Turning to her daughters, the queen asked, "What do you think of this human? Do any of you accept him?" Princess Alara, the eldest, was the first to speak. "But can a human really understand the weight of our empire? Can he bear the responsibility of what it means to be a royal consort?" Princess Vea, who had always rebelled against the constraints of her royal position, tilted her head, studying the human. "He may be different, but perhaps that is exactly what we need. Our empire has suffered long enough under the weight of tradition. Maybe it is time for something new." Princess Lyra, the middle child, looked at James with curiosity. "He is brave," she said. "And perhaps that is enough." The queen stood in silence for a long moment, weighing the words of her daughters. Finally, she looked back at James. "You may think you are worthy, human, but you will need to prove it. We will not make a decision based on words alone. You will face a series of trials. Only then will we decide if you are truly worthy of my daughters." James Carter nodded without hesitation. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'm ready." The queen's eyes narrowed, a faint smile curling on her lips. "We shall see." And so James Carter's journey to win the heart of the Thalaxian princesses and to prove his worth to the galaxy began. James Carter stood in the center of the Grand Thalaxian Palace, his heart racing. The queen had just declared that he would have to prove himself worthy of her daughters. The words echoed in his mind, and though he had expected a challenge, nothing had prepared him for the weight of what was to come. He had traveled far, crossed countless star systems, but nothing felt as important as this moment. His future, and the future of humanity in the galaxy, depended on him succeeding. The queen's cold gaze swept over him, her voice as sharp as a blade. "You will face 3 trials," she said. "The trial of the warrior, the trial of the mind, and the trial of leadership. Only if you pass all 3 will you be considered worthy of my daughters. Fail, and you will be cast aside as a mere fool." James didn't flinch at the severity of her words. He had faced difficult situations before. Life on Earth was full of them. But this was different. This was not just about survival. This was about proving that humanity, in all its imperfect glory, had a place in the stars. The first trial, the trial of the warrior, would test his strength and combat skills. He knew he wasn't a soldier, not like the Thalaxian warriors who had honed their skills for centuries. But James had learned to fight in his own way. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest, but he had something that the Thalaxians didn't. Determination. The arena was a massive circular structure built into the heart of the palace, surrounded by high walls. The ground was hard and unforgiving, a perfect place for a battle to take place. As James entered, the crowd's murmurs grew louder, anticipation filling the air. The Thalaxian warriors who would test him stood across from him, their armor gleaming in the light. They were taller and more powerful than any human he had ever encountered, their eyes filled with the cold confidence of centuries of tradition. James took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment that would define him. Without warning, the Thalaxian warriors lunged forward, their weapons raised. James didn't hesitate. He ducked to the side, narrowly avoiding the first strike. The battle was fierce and fast, but James kept his wits about him. He had no intention of defeating these warriors through strength alone. Instead, he relied on his agility, using their momentum against them. He dodged and weaved, striking when the opportunity arose. But the warriors were skilled, and they quickly adapted to his movements. One of them, larger than the rest, swung a massive blade at him. James barely managed to avoid it, but the force of the swing knocked him off balance. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was the moment that could end everything. But then, he remembered something his father had once told him. In the face of failure, don't give up. Learn from it. Improve. With a renewed sense of purpose, James regained his footing. He observed the warriors, watching for any sign of weakness. That's when he saw it, an opening. One of the warriors had overextended, leaving his side exposed. James acted without thinking, rushing forward and delivering a swift strike to the warrior's side. The blow was enough to knock the warrior off balance, and James followed through with a quick, decisive move, disarming him. The crowd gasped. The Queen raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his unexpected victory. But the battle wasn't over. 2 more warriors remained. James knew he couldn't rely on luck again. He had to think strategically. For what seemed like an eternity, James and the remaining warriors clashed in the arena. But slowly, his experience and determination began to shine through. He used their own moves against them, turning their strength into his advantage. One by one, he disarmed them, using their momentum to unbalance them. Finally, with a well-placed kick, he sent the last warrior to the ground. The arena fell silent as James stood, panting and bruised, but victorious. He had passed the trial of the warrior. As the crowd erupted into applause, James could hardly believe it. He had done it. He had won the first trial, but this was only the beginning. There were still 2 more trials to face, and each would be more difficult than the last. The Queen's cold eyes locked onto his, a hint of admiration in her gaze. You have proven yourself in combat, human. But the next trial will be far more challenging. The trial of the mind will test your intellect. Do not think it will be as easy as the first. James nodded.
I'm ready.
The next trial began shortly after. The trial of the mind took place in a vast chamber deep within the palace. The room was filled with strange symbols and alien artifacts, each one more complex than the last. The Queen explained that he would have to solve a series of puzzles designed to challenge the very limits of his intellect. Only by unlocking the secrets of the ancient Thalaxian language would he be able to pass. James examined the first puzzle carefully. It was a series of glowing symbols that seemed to shift and change before his eyes. He had no knowledge of Thalaxian writing, but he had a knack for patterns and problem-solving. He spent hours in the chamber, working through each puzzle, his mind racing to decipher the clues. At times it felt impossible. The symbols seemed to mock him, and frustration threatened to overtake him. But James refused to give up. He remembered the warriors in the first trial, how they had underestimated him. He couldn't let the same thing happen here. He had to keep pushing forward. Slowly, the puzzles began to fall into place. One by one, the symbols aligned, and the mysteries of the Thalaxian language began to unravel. When the final puzzle was solved, the chamber's walls lit up with ancient symbols, revealing a hidden passage. James had done it. He had passed the trial of the mind, but there was no time to rest. The final trial awaited, the trial of leadership. This trial would test not only his intellect and strength, but his ability to lead an empire. The Queen explained that he would be given a series of difficult decisions, each one affecting the fate of the Thalaxian Empire. He would have to balance politics, diplomacy, and military strategy. all while gaining the respect of the royal family. James stepped into the final arena, his heart pounding. This was the ultimate test. He had faced warriors and solved complex puzzles, but this was different. This was about more than just passing trials. This was about proving that humanity had a place among the stars. As he faced the trial ahead, James knew that every choice he made would shape his future and the future of the Thalaxian Empire. The trial of leadership was unlike anything James Carter had faced before. In the previous trials, he had relied on his physical strength and mental wit, but now he had to rely on something far more intangible: his ability to make decisions, to lead, and to inspire those around him. The Thalaxian Empire was not just a single planet or a small group of people. It was an entire galaxy of diverse species, each with its own ambitions and desires. The weight of leadership was heavier than James could have ever imagined. The Queen's voice echoed through the grand hall as she addressed him. "This trial will test your ability to govern. You will face challenges that will require you to make decisions that affect the fate of an empire. You must show that you can lead not only with strength, but with wisdom." James nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. He had no experience in ruling an empire. He had never been trained in politics or military strategy. He had been a soldier, a traveler, and an explorer, but never a leader. Yet, as he stood before the Queen, he realized that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. This was his chance to prove that humanity was capable of more than just surviving. They were capable of thriving in the stars. The first challenge came quickly. The Thalaxian diplomat entered the room, his face grave. "Your Majesty, a crisis is unfolding," he said. "A neighboring empire, the Zelrian, has just attacked one of our border colonies. They have taken prisoners, and the population is in danger. We must act swiftly to prevent a full-scale war." The diplomat's words struck James hard. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of a galaxy watching his every move. The Queen stood silently, observing his reaction. It was clear she was testing him, but she had not given him any guidance. He was on his own. James paced the floor, trying to gather his thoughts. He knew that if he called for an immediate attack, it could lead to a devastating war. But if he did nothing, the Zelrian could grow bolder and strike again. He had to find a way to navigate the delicate balance between action and diplomacy. After several moments of deep thought, James turned to the diplomat. "Send a message to the Zelrian Emperor," he said. "Demand the release of our prisoners and an immediate ceasefire. But do not threaten war yet. Offer them a peaceful resolution. I will personally travel to the Zelrian capital and negotiate a ceasefire. But if they refuse, we will have no choice but to retaliate." The Queen raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "You are taking a risk, human. But I see the wisdom in your words. A good leader knows when to fight and when to negotiate." The diplomat bowed and left the room to carry out James's orders. The next few hours were tense, as James waited for a response from the Zelrian. His mind raced, replaying every possible outcome. What if the Zelrian refused to listen? What if they were too proud to negotiate? James knew that this moment could change the course of history for the Thalaxian Empire and for humanity. Finally, the message came. The Zelrian Emperor had agreed to a ceasefire. They would release the prisoners and meet James in a neutral location for negotiations. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. As James stood in the throne room, the Queen walked over to him, her face unreadable. "You have passed the first test of leadership," she said, her voice softening. "You acted with wisdom, and you did not let emotion cloud your judgment. The Thalaxian people need more than a warrior. They need someone who can see the bigger picture." James felt a surge of relief, but the trial was far from over. The next challenge came almost immediately. The palace was suddenly filled with reports of unrest among the Thalaxian citizens. A group of rebels had risen up, demanding more rights and autonomy. They claimed that the royal family had become too distant from the people, too focused on power and politics. The Queen's grip on the empire was beginning to weaken, and the royal family's rule was being questioned. James was summoned to the royal council chamber, where a heated discussion was already underway. The Queen's advisors were divided, some advocating for harsh crackdowns on the rebels, while others suggested negotiating with them to prevent further violence. James listened carefully to the arguments, but he already knew what he had to do. He had seen this kind of unrest before, on Earth. People were not always driven by hatred or violence. Sometimes, they simply wanted to be heard. He had to find a way to address the Thalaxian people's concerns without resorting to bloodshed. "I propose that we meet with the rebels," James said, standing up. "Not as enemies, but as equals. We will listen to their grievances and address their concerns. If we must, we will make changes to our laws and our policies, but we will not resort to violence." The Queen's advisors were skeptical, but the Queen herself looked at James with a mixture of surprise and approval. "You would negotiate with them?" "After all that has happened?" "Yes," James replied firmly, "because a true leader listens to all sides, even those who disagree with them. We cannot rule an empire by force alone. We must rule with understanding." The Queen's silence was deafening. Finally, she spoke.
"Very well. We will meet with the rebels.
"But if they refuse to negotiate, we will have no choice but to act swiftly." The meeting with the rebels took place in a neutral location, far from the palace. James and the Queen's representatives met with the leaders of the rebel group, who were initially distrustful of the royal family's intentions. But James, with his calm demeanor and willingness to listen, was able to gain their trust. He promised that the royal family would work to address the issues of inequality and unfair treatment that had sparked the rebellion. Slowly, the rebels began to lower their weapons and agree to a peaceful resolution. By the time the negotiations were over, James had once again proven himself as a leader. The Thalaxian Empire was not without its flaws, but he had shown that with the right approach, change could happen. He had managed to avert a civil war and had created an opportunity for the empire to heal and grow. Back in the palace, the Queen called James to her chambers. "You have done well, human," she said, her voice softer than James had ever heard it before. "You have shown that you are more than just a warrior.
You have the heart and mind of a true leader. I was wrong to doubt you."
James felt a sense of pride, but he also knew that this was only the beginning. The empire was still fragile, and there were many challenges ahead. But for the first time, he felt like he could make a real difference. The Queen smiled. "You have passed the final trial. You are worthy of my daughters, and you are worthy to rule by their side." As James stood before the Queen, he realized that he had not just won the right to marry one of her daughters, he had won the right to help shape the future of the Thalaxian Empire. And, in doing so, he had proven that humanity had a place among the stars. The day had arrived. The trials were over. James Carter had proven himself in ways no one had expected, but the weight of what he had accomplished still pressed heavily on his shoulders. The Thalaxian Empire was vast, and while he had managed to steer it away from war and rebellion, the true challenge was just beginning. The empire was fragile, its people divided, and it was up to him to help lead them into a new era. As James stood before the Queen and her daughters in the grand hall of the palace, the air was thick with anticipation. The people of the empire were watching closely, and the royal court was eager to see what the future held. James had faced battles, solved complex puzzles, and navigated politics, but this moment felt different. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the future of an entire empire. The Queen, once skeptical of a human taking such a role, now stood beside James, her expression more thoughtful than ever before. Her 3 daughters stood behind her, each one more poised and regal than the last, but James could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They were about to make a decision that would not only change their lives but could shape the entire galaxy. "You have passed every trial, James Carter," the Queen said, her voice firm but with a hint of respect. "You have proven yourself worthy in combat, intellect, and leadership. My daughters have seen your strength, your heart, and your mind. Now it is time for them to choose who will stand beside them as the new consort to the Thalaxian throne." James's heart raced. He had spent so many days and nights thinking about this moment, yet now that it was here, he wasn't sure what to expect. The path had been full of challenges, but there was still so much to consider. Marrying one of the royal daughters wasn't just about a union of hearts. It was a union of entire empires, cultures, and destinies. Princess Alara, the eldest, stepped forward first. Her golden eyes met James's with a quiet intensity, as if she had been studying him for days. "You have proven yourself in every way, James," she said softly. "I can see that you are a man of honor, a man who understands the weight of leadership. But I have always been the one to carry the burden of our people. I do not know if I can share that burden with another." Her words hung heavy in the air. James had always admired Princess Alara's strength and dignity. She had been groomed from birth to rule, and he knew that her sense of duty to the Empire ran deep. He understood her hesitation. The future of the Empire was at stake, and she had always been its protector.
"I understand, Princess Alara," James said, his voice calm. "You have carried that burden alone for so long."
"But no one should have to carry such a weight by themselves. I am not here to take away your responsibility. I am here to help you shoulder it together." The princess didn't respond right away, but James could see the flicker of understanding in her eyes. She had spent so long preparing for this moment that the idea of sharing it with someone else felt foreign. But James wasn't just a suitor, he was a partner. He wasn't here to rule over her. He was here to work alongside her. Princess Vea, the youngest, stepped forward next. She was wild and unpredictable, a force of nature that defied the constraints of her royal position. Her dark hair framed her face like a storm, and her eyes burned with a fire that couldn't be tamed. "I've never been one for tradition," she said, her voice filled with defiance. "I've spent my life questioning everything, why we do things, why we follow the rules. But you're different, James. You've shown me that sometimes tradition isn't about following orders. It's about finding your own path." James met her gaze, his heart stirring. He had always admired her spirit, her refusal to be confined by the expectations of her royal lineage. She was untamed, yes, but that was what made her unique. Her strength wasn't in conformity. It was in her ability to challenge the status quo. "I don't have all the answers, Princess Vea," James said honestly. "But I do know that we can create a future together. A future where we decide our own path, where we make the rules, not follow them blindly. I want to help you create that future." Vea's eyes softened for a moment. James could see that she was torn between the life she had always known and the possibility of something new. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was one that she would have to make for herself. Finally, Princess Lyra, the middle child, spoke. She had always been the one to balance the extremes of her sisters, calm, rational, and compassionate. She had a way of seeing things that others couldn't. Her voice was steady and clear. "James, you've proven yourself to be more than just a warrior or a leader. You've shown us that you understand what it means to lead with heart. I've watched you, and I see the depth of your character. You don't seek power for its own sake. You seek it to protect and to build. That is what we need." Lyra's words were the final piece James needed. He had never sought power or glory. He had always been motivated by something deeper, the desire to make a difference, to help others, to create a better world for everyone. That was the essence of leadership, the kind that James had always believed in. The three princesses stood together, and for a long moment there was silence. The queen, who had watched all of this unfold, stepped forward. "James," she said, her voice filled with a quiet authority, You have proven that you are worthy not only of my daughters, but of the Thalaxian Empire. You have shown us the true meaning of leadership, and in doing so, you have earned a place beside my daughters as their equal. James felt a wave of emotion wash over him. This was the moment he had fought for, the moment that would change everything. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He wasn't just a human who had stumbled into this galaxy by accident. He was a part of something much larger, something that transcended species, politics, and power. He was part of the Thalaxian family, and together they would shape the future of the galaxy. Princess Alara, Princess Vea, and Princess Lyra each took a step toward him, their faces filled with a mix of respect and affection. They had each made their decision, and now it was time to move forward together. The Queen nodded, her expression softening. You have earned this, James Carter. The Thalaxian Empire is not just a place, it is a legacy. And you, along with my daughters, will carry that legacy into the future. As the ceremony began, James stood tall, his heart swelling with pride. He had not only won the hearts of the Thalaxian royal family, but he had proven that humanity had a place among the stars. Together, they would build a future of peace, unity, and strength. A future that was worthy of the Thalaxian name. The Empire had faced its darkest days, but with James by their side, the future had never looked brighter.